Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The vast medical starship hovered in orbit over the planet Dreshaw, its sleek white hull gleaming in the light of a distant sun. This was the flagship of the Galactic Medical Fleet, a specialized force created to handle the most catastrophic crises in the galaxy: plagues, environmental disasters, wars. Wherever there was chaos, the fleet was the first to respond. On board, doctors, medics, scientists, and engineers worked tirelessly, deploying the most advanced technologies known to humankind and alien species alike. Dr. Ethan Vega stood at the observation deck, gazing out at the pale blue planet below. It was hard to believe that the peaceful-looking world was in the grip of a disaster. He had read the reports of a deadly virus, rapidly spreading, infecting not only the local population but also their machines. It was unlike anything he had encountered during his training. This was Ethan's first assignment, and though his heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and fear, he was ready to prove himself. Behind him, the door slid open with a soft hiss, and the sharp voice of Dr. Laura Kessler, the fleet's senior physician, cut through his thoughts. "Dr. Vega, we've got a situation briefing in 10 minutes. You should be there." Ethan turned to face her, trying to mask his nervousness with a confident nod. "I'll be there, Dr. Kessler." She didn't smile. Dr. Kessler never smiled. Her face, lined from years of hard-won experience, was a permanent mask of stern focus. She was a legend in the fleet, having led the response teams on some of the worst outbreaks in recent memory. And Ethan knew that, in her eyes, he was just another rookie, another young doctor fresh out of medical school with big dreams but no real-world experience. "I suggest you take this seriously," she added before turning sharply and walking down the corridor. Ethan took a deep breath. "This is it," he thought to himself. "Time to prove that I belong here." The briefing room was filled with the hum of holographic displays and quiet conversation as the fleet's key personnel gathered around a large circular table. At the center of the table, a three-dimensional map of Dresh rotated slowly, highlighting key cities and regions affected by the outbreak. Captain Ralston, the commanding officer of the fleet, stood at the head of the table, his posture as rigid as the military uniform he wore. His gravelly voice silenced the room as he began the briefing. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're dealing with an unknown pathogen," he said, gesturing to the holographic map. "It's spreading at an alarming rate, and as of now, it's not only affecting biological organisms but also the eye systems on the planet. This is a dual threat scenario. Both organic and digital life forms are being compromised. Our primary objective is to contain the outbreak, identify the pathogen, and neutralize it." A medical officer stepped forward, her expression grim as she displayed images of infected individuals. Ethan's stomach turned as he saw the lesions covering their skin, their eyes wide with terror. "The virus, which we're tentatively calling the Erexis virus, has the ability to infect both organic and synthetic systems. It appears to reprogram neural and digital networks, causing erratic behavior in both hosts." Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. A virus that could affect both living creatures and machines? It defied all logic. His mind raced with questions, but he remained silent as the meeting continued. Captain Ralston concluded the briefing with a warning. "The planet's government is in a state of panic, and there are reports of rioting in several major cities. We'll be sending medical teams down to the surface immediately." "Dr. Kessler, you'll lead the primary response unit. Dr. Vega, you'll be working alongside her." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had expected to be assigned to a secondary role, maybe assisting in one of the field hospitals. But working directly with Dr. Kessler? It was both an honor and a terrifying responsibility. After the briefing, Ethan hurried to the medical bay to prepare. As he pulled on his sterile gear and checked the status of his portable medkit, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his chest. This was no ordinary outbreak, and if the reports were accurate, it was only going to get worse. The shuttle ride down to Dreshaw was tense. The team, consisting of Dr. Kessler, Ethan, a team of medics, and 2 engineers specializing in ice systems, sat in silence as the shuttle descended through the atmosphere. Outside the window, the once bustling cities of Dresha looked eerily deserted. Streets that should have been filled with people were empty, save for the occasional stray animal or malfunctioning robot stumbling through the wreckage. The shuttle touched down in the heart of Halaura City, the epicenter of the outbreak. As the hatch opened, the stench of decay hit Ethan like a wall. The air was thick with smoke, and in the distance, he could hear the faint crackle of gunfire. The situation was worse than he had imagined. Dr. Kessler wasted no time. "We're setting up a triage center here," she ordered, pointing to a nearby building that had once been a hospital. "Vega, you're with me, the rest of you, spread out and start assessing the situation." Ethan followed her through the hospital's broken doors, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, the halls were filled with the groans of the sick and dying. Makeshift beds lined the walls, and desperate families crowded around the few doctors and nurses still working. The staff was overwhelmed, and it was clear they were barely holding on. Dr. Kessler moved quickly, barking orders and directing the team with precision. Ethan struggled to keep up, assisting where he could, administering medications, stabilizing patients, and running diagnostic scans. But no matter how hard they worked, the numbers just kept growing. More and more people were brought in, their bodies ravaged by the virus. And worse, some of the hospital's machines had started to malfunction, attacking patients or shutting down without warning. As the hours dragged on, Ethan's exhaustion began to catch up with him. His hands trembled as he worked on a particularly critical patient, a young woman whose body had been almost completely overtaken by the virus. Her skin was pale, her eyes unfocused, and her breathing shallow. "We're losing her," he muttered, glancing up at Dr. Kessler for guidance. But before she could respond, the woman's body jerked violently, her limbs twitching in unnatural movements. Ethan stepped back in shock. "What the question mark?" Dr. Kessler was already moving. "She's been compromised by the I strand of the virus. We need to shut her down now." Ethan hesitated. "Shut her down?" "But she's still alive." "Not for long," Kessler snapped, grabbing a small device from her belt. "Once the eye infection takes hold, there's no saving them." Before Ethan could argue, she activated the device, sending a pulse through the woman's body. Instantly, she went still, her eyes closing as the life drained from her. Ethan stared in disbelief. "There has to be another way, a broken bar." Kessler turned to him, her face hard. "This is war, Vega. You don't always get to save everyone. Now focus, we've got work to do." The harsh reality of their mission hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about healing, it was about survival. And if they didn't act fast, Dresha would be lost. For the next few hours, Ethan threw himself into the work. There was no time to think, no time to question. Patients came in by the dozens, and each one was worse off than the last. The virus was spreading faster than they could contain it, and the eye systems were becoming increasingly aggressive. At one point, Ethan found himself face to face with a malfunctioning medical droid, its once helpful programming now twisted by the virus. The droid's arms flailed wildly as it tried to administer a lethal dose of medication to an already fragile patient. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed a nearby scalpel and severed the droid's power cables, watching as it collapsed to the floor in a heap of metal. "This is insane," he muttered to himself, wiping sweat from his brow. But there was no time to dwell on it. The situation was rapidly spiraling out of control, and the triage center was becoming a war zone. Ethan's exhaustion gnawed at his body, but he pushed it aside. The triage center was overrun, and it felt like every second counted. Dr. Kessler's words echoed in his mind, "This is war." There was no time for hesitation, no time for second guessing. He moved from patient to patient, stabilizing where he could, making tough calls where he had to. The relentless hum of malfunctioning machines and the groans of the infected filled the air, a cacophony of suffering that threatened to overwhelm his senses. Just as he finished dressing a wound on a young boy's arm, a high-pitched screech pierced through the building. Ethan looked up, his pulse quickening. One of the hospital's centrally hubs, a towering machine designed to assist with surgeries, had gone berserk. Its mechanical arms whipped wildly through the air, slashing at anything in its path. Medical personnel and patients alike scattered, ducking behind overturned beds and equipment. Dr. Kessler grabbed Ethan's arm, yanking him down as a metal claw narrowly missed his head. "We need to shut it down before it kills someone," Ethan nodded, adrenaline surging through his veins. "But how? We don't even know how deep the virus has embedded itself." Kessler's jaw clenched. "It doesn't matter, we need to take it off Linnea now." Together, they maneuvered through the chaos, dodging debris and the flailing limbs of the infected machine. Zara, the ship's eye specialist, appeared at their side, her face pale but determined. "I've been working on a way to disable the virus in isolated systems, but it's risky. If we hit the wrong circuit, it could fry the whole network." "Do it," Kessler snapped. "We don't have time to be cautious." Zara nodded, her hands moving swiftly over a portable console. She connected to the hub's central control unit, her fingers flying over the holographic display as she tried to find a vulnerability. The eye's movements grew more erratic, its arms slashing dangerously close to them. "Hurry!" Ethan shouted, his voice nearly drowned out by the screeching metal. "I'm trying." Zara's voice was tense as she worked. Finally, with a sharp intake of breath, she hit a final command. The eye screeched one last time before it powered down, its arms drooping lifelessly to its sides. The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the ragged breathing of the survivors. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For a moment, it felt like they had won a small victory. But as he surveyed the destruction around him, at the broken bodies, the ruined equipment, he knew this battle was far from over. Kessler stood, brushing dust from her uniform. "We can't keep putting out fires like this. We need to take a more aggressive approach or this entire planet will be overrun." Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow. "You're right. But what are we supposed to do? We don't even know where the virus originated, let alone how to stop it." Zara interjected, her face grim. "Actually, I might have found something. While I was in the system, I traced the virus's code back to a specific source. It's not natural this was engineered, and based on the data I've uncovered, I think it was designed to target both organic and digital life forms." Ethan's heart sank. "Engineered? By who?" Zara hesitated, her gaze flicking toward Kessler. "There are factions in this part of the galaxy that would benefit from destabilizing planets like Dresha. My guess is this was a deliberate attack, probably to weaken the planet before a takeover." Kessler's expression darkened. "So this isn't just a medical crisis, this is a prelude to invasion." Ethan felt a surge of anger. "We can't just let that happen. There must be a way to stop this." Zara nodded. "I've been working on a hybrid protocol, a treatment that could neutralize both the organic and digital components of the virus. It's experimental, and we'd need to test it on a live subject before deploying it on a larger scale." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Let's do it. We don't have any other choice." Kessler gave a curt nod, her eyes sharp with resolve. "Get it ready, Zara. We'll need to run the trials immediately." For the next several hours, the triage center became a makeshift research lab. Zara worked tirelessly to refine the hybrid treatment, while Ethan and Kessler coordinated with the rest of the medical team to stabilize as many patients as possible. The weight of responsibility pressed down on Ethan like never before. This was more than just a medical emergency, this was a fight for survival, for the future of an entire planet. The first trial was conducted on a patient in critical condition, a middle-aged man whose body was being ravaged by both the organic and eye strands of the virus. Ethan watched anxiously as Zara administered the treatment, his heart pounding in his chest. For a few agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the patient's vital signs began to stabilize. His breathing evened out, and the wild twitching of his limbs ceased. Ethan exchanged a look of disbelief with Kessler. It was working. But just as hope began to take root, a warning alarm blared from Zara's console. Her eyes widened in panic. Something's wrong. The virus is mutating. It's trying to adapt to the treatment. Ethan's mind raced. What do we do? If it mutates, we'll lose the only chance we've got. Kessler's voice was hard, unyielding. We need to act fast. Deploy the treatment across the planet now, before the mutation spreads. Zara hesitated. It's risky. If we don't neutralize the mutation in time, it could backfire. We don't have time for caution, Kessler snapped. Do it. Zara nodded, her hands flying over the console as she initiated the planetary-wide deployment of the hybrid treatment. Ethan felt a surge of fear and hope, his eyes fixed on the monitors displaying the status of the treatment as it spread through the infected zones. The minutes dragged on like hours, each second heavy with tension. Suddenly, the monitors lit up with activity. The virus was reacting, but not in the way they had expected. Instead of mutating, it was disintegrating. The treatment was working, breaking down the virus at its core. Across the planet, the infection was beginning to recede. Ethan let out a breath of relief, his heart pounding in his chest. They had done it. The planet was being saved. But before they could celebrate, a new threat emerged. One of the planetary leaders, secretly aligned with the faction responsible for the virus, had initiated a sabotage attempt. Explosions rocked the capital city, and chaos erupted as the traitor faction tried to seize control. Kessler grabbed Ethan's arm. We're not done yet. We need to stop this now. Ethan, Zara, and Kessler rushed toward the shuttle, their minds racing. They had fought so hard to contain the virus, but now the very people they had come to save were turning against them. It was a cruel twist, one that Ethan hadn't anticipated. But he knew they couldn't let the planet fall. In the capital, the fleet's forces clashed with the traitor faction, and Ethan found himself caught in the middle of a battle he hadn't signed up for. Armed with only his medical kit, he did what he could to tend to the wounded, while Kessler and Zara coordinated with the fleet to neutralize the insurgents. It was a brutal, chaotic fight, but eventually, the fleet's forces prevailed. The traitors were captured, their plan to sabotage the planet's recovery foiled. As the dust settled, Ethan stood among the wreckage, his heart heavy with exhaustion and relief. They had saved Russia, but at a great cost. The triage center was in ruins, the city was scarred, and countless lives had been lost. Kessler approached him, her face softer than he had ever seen it. You did good, Vega. Better than I expected. Ethan managed a tired smile. I had a good teacher. She gave him a rare nod of approval before walking away, leaving him to process everything that had happened. As the fleet prepared to leave Dreshaw, Ethan stood at the observation deck once more, gazing down at the planet below. He had come here as a young, inexperienced doctor, unsure of his place in the galaxy. But now, he knew this was where he belonged, on the front lines, fighting to save lives, no matter the cost. Just as the fleet's engines powered up for their next mission, a new distress call came in from a distant system. Ethan took a deep breath, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The galaxy's crises were endless, but so was the fleet's resolve.